event. We are presenting today a new report from the Wilson Center's Latin American program on the phenomenon of nearshoring. We're also delighted to have the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mauricio Claver Carone, with us, who will be engaging in a moderated conversation with two of our staff here at the Wilson Center. This is an event that we've titled Moving Day, Nearshoring Opportunities in Latin America. It touches on so many of the issues that are profoundly important to our programs in the Americas or on the Americas at the Wilson Center. Obviously, questions of economic development, international trade and investment, but ultimately, we're also talking about improving the lives of folks in the region in an integrated fashion, which ultimately impacts upon the well-being of the United States itself. I'd like to mention to you all that we have simultaneous translation on this call. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little globe that says interpretation. We have English and Spanish interpretation available right there. As a good reminder to me to slow down so that our translators can translate effectively. As I said, we'll be having a moderated conversation with the president of the Inter-American Development Bank and a launch of our paper, Widening the Aperture, Nearshoring in Our Near Abroad. A very exciting paper which outlines many of the possibilities, the opportunities, as well as the challenges of nearshoring in the region. This is a Wilson dialogue in the sense that we'd love to have your questions sent in. So please send us your questions via Twitter to @LATAMPROG, LATAMPROG, or via email to lap@wilsoncenter.org. So please send in those questions because we'd love to hear from you. It now gives me enormous pleasure to be able to introduce officially Mauricio Claver Carone, who is the president of the Inter-American Development Bank. He was elected as president in September of 2020. He also chairs the board of the executive directors of IDB Invest, the private sector arm of the IDB group, immensely important in these conversations, of course, and the donors committee of IDB Lab, the bank's incubator for innovative development projects, something that Mauricio, I would love to talk more about with you in the future. Prior to his election, Mauricio served as Deputy Assistant to the President of the United States and Senior Director for Western Hemisphere Affairs at the National Security Council. In this capacity, he was the U.S. President's principal advisor on issues related to Canada, Latin America, and the Caribbean. During his tenure, Mr. Claver Carone conceptualized a whole-of-government economic growth initiative, America Crece, which led to the creation of energy and infrastructure finance frameworks with nearly half of the nations in Latin America and the Caribbean. He also spearheaded the first White House-led Western Hemisphere strategic framework for U.S. interagency policy guidance and development since 2004. Prior to these roles, Mauricio served as the United States Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund, where he represented the U.S. as the largest shareholder on the IMF's executive board. In this capacity, he worked with the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the Fed, and U.S. interagencies to effectively present policies regarding foreign exchange practices, debt transparency, and trade to the executive board and to IMF management. He also played an important role in lending arrangements for Argentina, Barbados, and Ecuador, and revolving credit lines for Colombia and Mexico. Mauricio's resume goes on and on and on, but I won't do that because that's not why you're here. You're here to hear from the man himself. And to make that happen, I'm delighted to be able to pass over this conversation to the director and deputy director of our Latin American program, Cindy Arnson and Benjamin Gadan, who will moderate this conversation. Let me just say before I close, I'm delighted that this is an event which is sponsored by all of our Americas programs, the Latin American program, Brazil Institute, Canada Institute, and Mexico Institute, another great example of the regional collaborations that we have underway. Cindy, over to you.
Duncan, thanks so much. And Mauricio, thank you so much for joining us for this keynote conversation. Let's get right to it. What is the IDB doing to promote nearshoring in the region, especially in the areas that are not part of the USMCA, places the Caribbean, Central America, the North, of South America, Colombia in particular. What is the IDB's role in helping to bring investment by U.S. companies, also by other companies, to Latin America, to woo the manufacturers that are looking for greater diversity in the geographic distribution of their manufacturing facilities?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And first and foremost, thank you to Wilson Center. Thank you for doing this. Richard, Ricardo, great to see you. Thank you, Richard, for a tremendous report. Really enjoyed it, and it's really at the heart of what we do. And Ricardo, look forward to hearing, obviously, from the U.S. government perspective. But if as former colleagues, if Richard, Ricardo, and I are kind of in tune on an issue, it means there's something there, right? There's something good there, and that's positive, and because they're extraordinarily knowledgeable and people I highly respect, and so I'm glad that we can be doing this event together, because it means a great deal. It means a great deal for the region. It's really, like I keep saying, a multi-generational opportunity, and it's literally at the heart of everything we're doing at the IDB right now. To the chagrin of some of my shareholders, that not all of our shareholders love it, because they see it a bit as a competition. But my guiding light is creating jobs and opportunities for the country, for our 26 shareholders in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's precisely what we want to do here. Look, we've made this a critical part of everything from Vision 2025, which is kind of our guiding light in that regards, to making it the first business line of IDB Invest in that regard. So this is just not just important nearshoring to recover from the pandemic, but to really bring in a new era of sustainable growth to the region. And I can really say, and I say it with pride, and I say it with the scars to show, that the IDB is truly leading the way on nearshoring in this regard. We are the only entity, probably next to the government of Japan, that is literally has a toolkit that is incentivizing and financing nearshoring activities in that regards. We're working with all our member countries. And what we've really seen is a rapid growing, which I was extraordinarily pleased of. 6 months ago, we launched a coalition of private sector partners to really seize on this once in a multi-generation opportunity in this regards, which ironically was created by the pandemic. We can talk more about, but the goal here is to bolster supply chains and boost nearshoring. We believe, obviously, that if we don't act boldly, like, this is going to pass us by, and obviously then we're going to start getting into lost decades, which is not what we want to do. But let me, before kind of get into a little bit more the reality of nearshoring, it's something that it's already happening, right? So this is happening. We're starting to see it. I think Richard describes it well in his report. So the way I see, I get some of our shareholders, our European and some of our Asian shareholders, say, hey, look, the IDB is not, and by the way, I apologize to the translator already, because I have the bad habit of speaking really fast. So I'm going to slow down a little bit. But what I see, they say, hey, you're not an export promotion agency. And I said, we're a job creation agency. Nothing has greater development impact than created jobs. So I see my job to make sure that what is happening right now with nearshoring is happening, and it is first and foremost benefiting Latin America and the Caribbean. So what are we doing? First, 6 months ago, we launched the largest private sector coalition in IDB history, and we prioritized making that coalition grow. We're going to have an event now with the 6-month results within our Vision 2025, 5 work streams, and they've been working. But let me just say something I'm extraordinarily proud of. We began that private sector coalition, which is already the largest in the history of the bank, with 40 of the biggest global companies, mostly U.S. companies. That coalition today went from 40 to 123 companies. We have 123 of the biggest global companies, mostly U.S. companies, which are working and are part of now our private sector coalition and are working continuously with our working groups. Within the Nearshoring working group, we have over 30 companies, and it includes everyone from Airbnb, Amazon, Bayer, Gap, Google, list goes on, you name them. And we're really just focused specifically on the issue of nearshoring. We're literally working on everything from data lakes to skill registries, co-investing, you name it. So I'm really proud of that. And when we made nearshoring one of those key 5 pillars of Vision 2025, we made it part of the IDB's blueprint for reinvesting in the Americas and kickstarting growth. And for IDB Invest, we just presented its business plan to the board. It's the first time in history that nearshoring is actually a business line now for IDB Invest in that regards. All the analysis that we've done shows that really that the success that we can achieve if we're doing this. And we've made sure also, which has been a bad habit in the past sometimes of the bank, that we're not siloed and that all of our efforts are as a group. So IDB, IDB Invest, IDB Lab, that they're all connected in those pillars. By the way, the other pillars, so nearshoring is the first of the 5 pillars of Vision 2025, but we also have digitalization, climate change, gender, women's empowerment, and obviously small, mid-sized companies. So we're investing heavily in all of these regards. Digitalization, which is part of, because they're all intertwined. So digitalization is critical to nearshoring of services, education of young adults, all of it. We're seeing in countries like Uruguay, Colombia, and Costa Rica, we really feel that those are some of the countries that are really out front on this. In Uruguay, for example, we've been funding finishing schools to train thousands of employees from hundreds of companies in fields like IT, healthcare, architecture, you name it. And thanks to programs like these, we've seen over 30 international companies that have invested or expanded operations in Uruguay. So we're helping that whole ecosystem. Ecuador is another good story where we've done an electronic single window for investor services. And that really helps increase FDI by reducing cost, time of trade. So that also helps in that ecosystem. So we think that what we want to do is make sure that it's appealing to the Americas, that's appealing to investors, and working with those governments in that regards. As you all know, and it's really one of the greatest tragedies, frankly, from a trade perspective, Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the least integrated regions in the world. We've talked about this statistic over and over again. Less than 15% of our trade takes place intra-regionally. Compare that to 60% in Europe, 40% plus in East Asia. And that would have a huge effect in itself. We've estimated that harmonizing the extraordinary, add to the fact of lack of integration, these complex intra-regional trade agreements, there's 30 plus of them. If we could just harmonize those, that in itself would increase trade in the region by over 10%. That's $20 billion, huge opportunity. So we're working with our partners, our borrowing nations, our governments to spur that integration, to really help them also adopt best regulatory transparency practices, which are going to be critical in that regards. We're also leading an effort in 14 countries in the region to look at products and sectors that are really available, right, to benefit of that. So looking at comparative advantages, right? There's the other great Ricardos. You got Richard Ricardo, and there's another great Ricardo, David Ricardo, right, who has comparative advantages. So we're working to figure out what those comparative advantages are. And we've done major events now, just in the last few months, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, to promote trade, investment, nearshoring, the Brazil Investment Forum. I actually went to Sao Paulo last month or month before last. I don't remember what week it is. And we had the largest turnout in the history of that event. We had over 7,000 participants from over 100 countries and almost $70 billion in investment transactions there. I mean, big opportunity. We also have programs like Outsource to LAC, the region's kind of flagship event for global digital services, which as the report itself shows is extraordinarily important. And then other Connect Americas for Women platform as well, which is the social network for businesses in our region. And then of course you're familiar, and we're really revamping and strengthening the American business dialogue to really help those private sector ties, and a great opportunity going into the Summit of the Americas next year. Before I conclude this part, I want to focus also on small companies, because that has huge development impact. And obviously everything we do is focused on that development impact. We have seen, and our studies indicate, that boosting the participation of companies, particularly small, medium-sized enterprises, in those regional supply chains, can really increase. It can have huge effect as well on GDP per capita in that regards. And that's why we've really, as part of that Vision 2025 as well, focused on financing small companies to really give them the tools to boost their ability to export goods and services. That helps. We're seeing Chile is a great example of this. There's over 300 companies there that have gotten training to boost services and exports, and you can really see it kind of go down through the reverse factoring that we're seeing in some of those supply chains, which is something we're doing a lot. In our toolkit, which we launched at the annual meeting in Barranquilla, a nearshoring toolkit, like we've done everything, kind of along with the government of Japan, financial, non-financial tools. Like if a company wants to move to the region, we'll help finance their move. So we're not just talking to talk about nearshoring, we're walking the walk of nearshoring. We're seeing some good results in that regards. But not just financing, research, strategic partnerships, advisory services, all of it. We're also offering capital investments, loan guarantees in that regards, which have been attractive. So I think building on all that, we have a pretty robust pipeline of projects, which we're going to be presenting more of when we now do the 6th month of this. And I think there's a great opportunity. But again, it's everything: moving factories, rule of law, human capital, regulatory frameworks, and to really make the best out of this opportunity, we need to really work on all fronts. And I think this is a great opportunity to do so. Let me just add, because we don't talk, and I think we'll have some time later, and I'll give you a quick overview on those. But other parts, comparative advantage, we just talked, in that regards. Caribbean, we're preparing projects that's going to create thousands of jobs, we've estimated, on textile exports to U.S. and Central America. We're looking to train over 40,000 people in IT and foreign language skills for work in U.S. European companies. In the Dominican Republic, there's a new project that's going to boost exports on local port facilities. We're really focused on those. And Costa Rica is a huge opportunity, and a huge opportunity there as well, with the great work the Biden administration has been doing on semiconductors and microprocessor sectors. Huge opportunity to increase investment, improve supply chains there. We're seeing the shortage of chips that's affecting commerce everywhere, and that's a huge opportunity. And Costa Rica is really at the forefront of that. I'm going to shut up now because I have a tendency to ramble, which I'm sure your translator doesn't appreciate.
Excellent. No, we appreciate it. Thanks, Mauricio. Welcome again. I wanted to take a step back, if I could, just to examine this broader trend of nearshoring, which motivated Richard Feinberg's excellent paper that we published and we'll discuss in greater detail later, and Mauricio, that you've referenced in our conversation. I agree with you. I mean, it seems likely that the supply chain disruptions we've seen throughout the pandemic will lead manufacturers to reconsider their dependence upon China, the concentration of their productive capabilities in one geographic location. And it's possible they'll establish production facilities closer to major markets, including the United States, or maybe to other locations in Asia, such as Malaysia and Vietnam. However, I mean, it does seem to me so far that the idea of decoupling is pretty hypothetical, right? And it wouldn't be cost-free for the manufacturers who've already put in so much investment in East Asia, in China. You've mentioned that this phenomenon is happening. You cited Ecuador, you cited Uruguay. I guess I'm looking for more evidence that this trend is real. Have we seen companies setting up shop in Latin America that had previously been operating the same facilities in China or elsewhere in East Asia? How confident are you, Mauricio, that all of the hype around nearshoring will come to fruition, and that all the efforts you just described to bring companies to Latin America to make sure the region is capable of attracting them are actually going to move in the first place?
Yeah, I think we've already seen evidence of it, and we've seen it particularly Colombia, like I said, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Guatemala. So there's some countries, and at the end of the day, that's going to be important. But let's look at it then, and I think we're gonna do a lot more to kind of show the details of some of those companies, et cetera. But just look at it first and foremost, kind of from the flip side, right? As you well pointed out, those multinationals have been investing in China for decades, and it's really accounted for 35% of global manufacturing. So in that regards, but what we saw with the pandemic is that there was an over-reliance. So what we're already seeing in that regards is that the Chinese exports are falling. We saw over 50 billion just as initially as regards to the pandemic. And we've seen as evidence the disrupting trade that's taking place in that regards. So we've witnessed how that over-reliance on China in particular as a single country. And by the way, again, this is not an anti-China thing. China is a member of the bank. This is about if that disruption is happening and it's taking place, and there's the mad scramble we saw during the pandemic for face masks, ventilators, everything. We all lived it. That the global corporate community realizes that reliance on a single source is not only unwise, but it's dangerous, and they're not doing it. Financial Times had a story recently I saw about how even the price of exports in Shenzhen and others are increasing. So that's a reality, and the reality of result of putting too many eggs in one basket. So our goal now is for Latin America, how it can and should be part of the solution. And by the way, this isn't a political issue, it's not a logistical issue. It's really an economic, it's a national security issue, I believe, for the United States, although that's not my job anymore. And it's a health and safety issue, and in many cases, a matter of life or death in that regard. So by the way, I'd add, it's an environmental issue. Producing so many things far away raises the carbon footprint on all those goods because we got to ship them thousands of miles to get them to consumers. And that also makes nearshoring supply chain what is now an ESG issue for investors who really want to invest and have an environmentally sustainable company. So there's no angle that this can be looked at that doesn't show how it benefits Latin America and the region. And then the question is, as you pose, our companies are, what are they doing to diversify and to take advantage of those supply chains? So look, we talk a lot with a lot of companies and governments about this, and obviously, we're going to put more of these out when we do our 6-month review, and I don't want to get ahead of our partners in some of these companies, but let me highlight a couple of things in this regards, and I would actually focus it with the statistic that I've now said many times and I'm obsessed with because I think it just needs to continue sinking in. we have estimated that if Latin America captured just 10%, of U.S. imports from its top 10 source destinations outside the Western Hemisphere. So we're not even talking about doing new things. Just take 10% of what was already imported to the United States from other countries, from China, and just flip it over to Latin America and the Caribbean. That would increase exports in the region by $72 billion per year. So think about that. That's just astonishing. It's a game changer in that regards. I'd mentioned many times over, and I'll repeat, kind of going through the other side, the Gartner survey, we had about a third of 250 global companies had already moved part of their manufacturer supply chains out of China, or were planning to do so by 23. Again, huge opportunity in this regards. But there's some even more recent data that we're seeing. A few months ago, Kearney survey had about over 100 U.S. manufacturing executives found that reshoring, and in this case, that was just coming to the United States, was already happening in a significant way. Over 40% were saying that they had already reshored part of their operations, so it's happening. Over 50% were saying that admitted how COVID disrupted their supply chains, and over 40% are saying, hey, we got to reduce the dependency on China. So now take that, put it into Latin America and the Caribbean, so they can absolutely seize that opportunity, which is why we're working. Like, look, I know the region, and Ricardo knows better than I at this point, and better than Richard at this point, because he's in the hot seat. Has a lot of challenging issues, and I know that we all have our work cut out for us. But we don't need to have 100% of all the companies in China set up in Latin America to have nearshoring to work. I mean, if I just mentioned, if we just had 10% of what's already being imported from China, that's already also being imported from the Western Hemisphere, and just flip it over, that's $72 billion in increased exports a year. I mean, think about how critical that is. So our job is to see how we can make it easy, attractive to invest in the region. We believe that if that happens, which we're seeing there's some good cases and there's some bad cases. Don't get me wrong. There's some countries that are doing all the wrong things, which I'm not going to mention, right? Because they're all my shareholders, and I love them all. But they can be doing things a lot better. But there's some good success cases out there, and we really think that if we help them be more competitive, it's really going to boost that. And we're seeing the data, and we're talking to the companies, and we're seeing those moves, and we're going to be working with our partners and friends now to be able, as we report on the private sector partnership, to give you some of those shining examples.
Mauricio, thanks again. I'd like to remind people who are watching the webinar, if you have a question that you'd like to submit, please send it to our Twitter account at LATAMPROG, LATAMPROG, or to our email laplap@wilsoncenter.org. Mauricio, you just mentioned reshoring. The Biden administration has made a significant, or has put a significant emphasis on bringing jobs back to the United States, on creating good paying manufacturing jobs for US workers. Do you think that these efforts by the US government to reshore manufacturing to the United States is in competition with the efforts to nearshore to the Caribbean, Central America, other parts of Latin America?
Absolutely not. It's not a zero-sum game. And look, I commend the Biden administration. I think that their plans are absolutely on the right track, and I think they're compatible with nearshoring in Latin America and the Caribbean. In fact, I don't think you can really have the former without the latter in that regards. So look, let me just say, Ben, I want to talk about some minerals, but before that, I mean, I hope, we talked about the third great, Ricardo, like it's about comparative advantages. They're just literally comparative advantages in each country in the region that the United States is not going to have. And at the end of the day, then the question should be for policymakers and others, and for members of Congress as well, in making some of the benefits and some of the free trade agreements, including CAFTA for textiles, for example, really need to think about is, do you want that import to come in from China and Asia, or do you want it to happen right here in Central America or other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean? That's going to be the key question there, and I think that that's completely compatible in that regards. And I really hope, I in my previous lives, I ran into challenges with in regards to reshoring versus nearshoring with different parts of the U.S. government, and that was a mistake. And I kept arguing how they weren't that they were indeed not competitive, that they were compatible. And I have great faith that the Biden administration sees that opportunity, and I look forward to working with them on that, because we do believe it's key. But look, rare earth minerals, right? Think about just all of this. we're seeing this transition to renewables across, which are critical, and we saw it as part of the supply chain initiative that administration put out. It's critical to U.S. and national security interests, but they're also critical to combating climate change and things of the sort. Now, consider wind turbines, right? We used to produce clean energy. What's inside of them? Copper, right? Rare earth elements, other materials from South America. This is like the unique opportunity. I'm obsessed with this, and we're working on 21st century mineral extractive policy so that we can really take advantage of this unique opportunity in this transition. Electric vehicles, right? It's all lithium and copper. Who's the top producer in the world of copper? Chile. Who's the top producer of lithium in the world? Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. But yet, now we have to do is the reverse factoring to make sure that the supply chains, because those materials were going to Asia to then come back in batteries to the United States. Makes no sense whatsoever. So Latin America, just in this historic, because it's truly historic and it's led by the administration's historic move towards renewables, it really presents a huge opportunity to the region with the enormous amount of rare earth and other materials that are vital to U.S. private and public sector interests that are right here in Latin America, in the Caribbean. So, we believe that this is a huge opportunity, a huge industry, and we've been following all this very closely here, and we're really closely aligned with the administration in this regard. So we're also working with the governments in the region to increase their capacity to, for example, just on minerals, and forgive my obsession on this because I think this is just a huge opportunity to really increase their capacity to extract, to produce key materials sustainably, and to really open up new markets in this sector. We think it's in the interest of U.S. businesses, consumers, governments, for us to partner with the region to secure that supply chain of those key goods. And we've already seen some identified in the EO that came out. And happily, it's also in the best interest of Latin America and the Caribbean. So I think there's a vested interest all around in that regards. And then, of course, I think that we have not been, and we're improving as a bank in regards to also working with civil society in those countries. So as we do this 21st century mineral framework to be able to, we're also working with companies that are looking at, okay, how can they do so more sustainably? How can they do so in a way that incorporates and benefits the local communities as well? That's a key role as an honest broker that the bank can play, and that we're really excited to do that, because obviously it's going to be great for a prosperous Latin America, to expand the consumer base for U.S. export, to create jobs in the U.S. in the region. It will help issues obviously with like migration and others. So again, win-win situation for everyone. I love win-wins, and I think this is another reason we see this.
Mauricio, what about the renewable energy technologies themselves? And you mentioned, the copper is in Chile and Peru, the lithium is in Bolivia and Chile and Argentina. A lot of these governments want to produce the batteries, they want to produce the electric vehicles. Right now, they want to produce the renewable technologies like wind turbines and solar panels. For now, most of that technology comes from East Asia, comes particularly from China. When you think about nearshoring, do you think only of the minerals that you referenced that are key to these technologies, or is there a sense that Latin America could actually produce the wind and solar technologies, the battery technologies, the electric vehicles that depend upon those minerals that you referenced, the copper, the lithium, and other materials found in Latin America? How do these technologies themselves factor in to the IDB's nearshoring vision?
And that's exactly the point. I think, and as I mentioned, we're seeing we have the commodities are here in the region, then they go off to Asia for the processing, for the technology side, and then they come back to the consumer markets in the U.S. We gotta break that triangulation. It should be a direct north-south line and axis. What we're trying to do in this regards, because it's been really complex. Look, right now, I had a big conversation yesterday because, hey, look, we're seeing with the solar panels, like a lot of those solar panels, not only, it's not just about, and it's not about anti-China or anything of the sort, to the contrary, but it is anti-forced labor, and it is anti, the abuses that we're seeing in Xinjiang. So, but yet the solar panels are, really being put together and produced in those areas through forced labors in areas that should be a concern to the entire international community. And it is of concern to us and to all multilateral development banks. So we need to streamline all of that. Now, how can we do it? Unfortunately, that you just hit kind of where the big gap is in the continuum. And what we're trying to do in that regard is work with some of the companies to do reverse factoring, to really see how we can, kind of build that supply chain backwards so that it does go south to north and it avoids, those issues. But that's going to be a key part. Unfortunately, I'd like to say that it's been successful everywhere, but no, I just talked to a big energy company that had began the technology processing side in a country in the region, and they got frustrated because of some issues, and then they moved it to Vietnam, and that makes no sense. By the way, for the U.S. consumer market, we need to stop that, and we're trying to like really nip that in the bud per se, and working. But look, literally, like this isn't about. I believe in walking the walk. We were like rolling up our sleeves, talking one company at a time. Okay, how can we avoid this? How can we help? How can we streamline this? And it's a lot of work, but I think we can be successful. I'm very optimistic.
Thanks, Mauricio. Let's talk a little bit about Richard Feinberg's paper that we'll be discussing just after this conversation. He talks about development hubs in the region, creating things that would have environmental and labor standards and have free trade regimes that would allow them to export to the United States. What is the experience in Latin America with creating these kinds of special economic zones? And are there examples precisely in East Asia that could be instructive for the effort to create these hubs in our near abroad?
Yeah, look, I think, as part of our efforts to reactivate economies, make them more sustainable, inclusive, support business, create jobs, all of that, I think this plays a real key part in that, and it ties in nicely to all of our efforts that we've been doing here in the U.S. And in other countries. Look, special economic zones in particular really are one of several policy options that really we believe can raise foreign direct investment and increase countries' participation in the global supply chains. We've done studies on this. We found that there are about, I believe it's like 450 or 500 special economic zones in Latin America, and they've really helped create almost 2 million jobs, increase annual exports by over $25 billion. So they have an impact, right? And for those zones to increase nearshoring, we think that countries also need to create related programs, the ecosystem, as we would call it, to help those investors set up different stages of production, whether it's for goods, services, or both. For those zones, I think it's also important to be, to have this be a holistic approach. At the end of the day, it has to be holistic with nearshoring, with socioeconomic development, so it could be part of the solution. We don't think they're the panacea for growth, but they can be a solution. They can promote business activity, investments in that regards, and also help business and sectors lower costs, become more efficient, which is, at the end of the day, the big issue here. Policymakers generally, I think, should look at these new special economic zones and how they could boost nearshoring to take advantage of artificial intelligence, robotics, other technologies, and really think of this through, again, the other great Ricardo, competitive advantages. Central America, Peru, other countries have certain advantages, for example, in textiles, in Costa Rica, on medical goods, semiconductors. And again, you're going to talk to Richard about this in this regards. But let me just say one other thing. One of the things that we're doing also differently here in the bank, not only just bringing nearshoring to the forefront here, but also really bringing U.S. companies into. I talked about the private sector partnership that we've done with the bank. We started with 40, now it's the largest in the history of the bank, 123 companies. Actually, yesterday we signed up 124 in this regards. But we're also introducing the bank. As all of you know, it is one of the most respected brands, the honest broker in the region. If you look at, there was a Reuters poll last year that had, the approval rating of the bank in the region is 80+%. But here in the United States and amongst U.S. companies, it has been less known. So we've been doing roadshows, introducing the bank. So how we can help, and nearshoring is a big part of this, how we can help those companies here in the U.S. With those nearshoring activities. We did in Miami, we just did the first, it was mind-boggling to me that in 61 years of this bank, we had never done an event in Miami. So we did a Miami LAC event, and we literally had 65,000 people in 2 days tune in. We did 2 days of matchmaking. We did $100 million in 2 days of business for the region, just by going to Miami. We want to do the same thing: New York, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, you name it. We want to go introduce the bank of how we can help those companies. We really think that that's a tremendous opportunity, and nearshoring plays a big part of that. And you're seeing that. By the way, and I'll shut up with this, but I thought it was really fascinating because it was a thesis that we had that was proven in Miami. There was 3 types of investors. We SoftBank and BlackRock, we got together with everyone, and we were looking at what the investors were looking at for the region. And it was great because with this kind of migration, whether it's in the tech, digital world or others in the financial services world towards Miami, the reality was 3 things. You had a bunch of investors that really want to invest in Latin America and the Caribbean, but they're looking for some U.S. nexus, right? We can help you there, 100%. So we just made a whole bunch of new friends. 2, investors that had gone to Miami had never really heard or really worked in Latin America, the Caribbean, or thought about it. And then because they were in Miami, as we call it, I like to say, I'm as a Miamian, once you're in the potaje, like you're there, man, you're just one step away. So actually, it was a great digital investor who had bought dozens of companies and sold dozens of companies. He was Kenyan, Indian Kenyan, fantastic entrepreneur. He had never thought about Latin America and the Caribbean. And Miami got super interested in it and has now bought half a dozen companies, digital companies in Latin America because he learned it through Miami. That's a whole population. By the way, not just about having to go as far away as Kenya, but investors here from San Francisco, otherwise, that frankly have been a bit elitist. Silicon Valley has been elitist towards Latin America and the Caribbean. I'll say it. And so how we can, as they go to Miami, then how we can get them one step further. Those investors are there. And then the third, which is really interesting and really interesting for this conversation, were investors that had invested in the region before, has literally, quote unquote, as they will tell you, have lost their shirt off their backs, like lost a lot of money for whatever reason, and we're looking for ways to get back in and avoid some of the issues of the past. They give you the whole list of issues, but there, digitalization, and going now, it's a great segue to Richard. Digitalization is the key. They really find the digital market, the tech market, et cetera, as their way to circumvent some of the issues they've had in the past, whether it's with inflexible labor or complex archaic bureaucracies, et cetera. They've really found a way, and they think they're confident that they found a way to do so and circumvent a lot of that through investment in digital services and technology. And again, that's a great opportunity as well. So I'm very excited. I'm very optimistic, and thank you for the opportunity to partner with you guys on this.
Excellent. Thank you, Mauricio. I want to start taking some of the questions from our participants. We have lots of them, and they're excellent. One question from Robert Thomas from MLEX Market Insight looks at a potential obstacle to nearshoring, and that's corruption and rule of law questions in Latin America. I'm paraphrasing his question, but I think it gets to a lot of the challenges that the Ricardo Zuniga and a lot of his colleagues at State and on the NSC have been pointing out frequently of late, which is challenges to the rule of law in particularly the Northern Triangle of Central America, but elsewhere in the region as well. The United States Congress has become very interested in this, and there have been reports generated by the State Department regarding senior figures in the private sector and government who are engaged in corrupt acts. This obviously creates a lot of regulatory risk for US and other companies that might want to enter Latin America, might want to move their facilities there. So my question, Mauricio, is the fight against corruption, the state of corruption in regions that would naturally be the places companies might look, whether you heard that in Miami when you were discussing moving to Latin America for technology investors, whether you think of this as an obstacle for multilateral companies that might see the convenience of the geography of operating near the US market, but might have some concerns regarding the rule of law, regarding corruption.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's two ways to go at this, right? We got to tackle it head first, and I commend Ricardo and the administration for the challenge they've taken to really deal with this head first. And I think we need to speak with a united voice on this, and we're doing our part. Here at the IDB, even 20 years ago, and I've heard this, we're getting more of our shareholders are interested in for us to address governance, right? 10, 20 years ago, there was, he was like, oh, we're getting involved in the sovereignty of countries. Look, we're not, it's not about sovereignty. It's literally about facilitating commerce. It's about serving your citizens better. It's about transparency. It's going to make for better governments, better economies, create more jobs. So we're now not only helping make that argument, but there's more of a consensus towards the importance of governance in dealing with these issues. And I think that's key. We're starting to see in our country strategies, and we've done now in a couple of on Central America, where rule of law and transparency is now for the first time ever, and I'm proud to have made this the case in the last couple of months, is now for the first time ever part of our country strategies as well, because there's a greater consensus. So we need to speak with a unified voice, because this is a great impediment. You all know the statistics of what it costs on GDP. Now, from the private sector side, look, IDB Invest is a hugely important actor for us. One of the reasons that we're working and trying to make the case, and fortunately the U.S. Senate has agreed for a capital increase for the bank, is we want to do more equity investment. If we're able to do more equity, which is capital intensive, then guess what? We have a spot on those boards. We're able to bring that good governance, transparency to the board of some of these companies, and really inject that. U.S. investment, everything we're doing with the private sector. Why am I obsessed in the private sector partnership bringing in U.S. companies? Because guess what? When we invest in the region, when U.S. companies invest in the region, we bring the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act with them. So we're literally, we are the best advocates of that. We're literally carrying that in the backpack, and it really. I hate to use the word first, but it makes a very convincing argument for good behaviors. And then there's a whole other issue, which is digitalization and being creative in that regards. One of the biggest things we're doing now is helping governments with digital government. We've done a lot of our recent pipeline has been on the digitalization of government. The more the government digitizes, then the more ability there is to circumvent a lot of those corrupt activities, but also doing some creative things otherwise, from the private sector side. We just launched our Green Bond Transparency Initiative so that investors, as they invest in ESGs and invest on these issues, they follow the projects throughout. We just did our infrastructure app, Built Americas, whereby we're helping investors that are investing in infrastructure projects and on procurement issues, that they can see the list of providers, so that we avoid those middlemen. We all know the middlemen and women in the region that, oh, here, you got to do this project with this person, right? That's a huge source of corruption. We're trying to break those middle actors through the Built Americas app in that regard. Mapa Inversiones is a partnership we're doing with Microsoft in the region to follow as well those investments, government spending, procurement, with Chile, the Innovation Chile initiative that we're doing there to bring transparency. So digitalization is also, so I guess I would say, I said two, tackling head on, obviously the public side, private sector, how we can improve it. But then I would add third, through the digitalization is a huge and powerful tool to bring that transparency and being creative there with governments and partnering up with private sector as well to do that.
Mauricio, to take off on that, what you just said about digitalization, there's a question from Angus Macaulay about the recent adoption of Bitcoin in El Salvador and a number of other countries. Panama, Argentina, Paraguay are also looking at these kinds of digital currencies. Could cryptocurrencies be an opportunity to integrate Latin America, or is it an obstacle?
No, so as you all know, and there's two different concepts here. There's the blockchain and kind of that technology to facilitate payments, which we are working very closely with the countries in the region on. We've actually created it's called LACchain, a LACchain initiative to really facilitate payments, and we're working with Citigroup and others to really help to see how we can not only expedite and facilitate payments among central banks, with people, with remittances, et cetera, at a low level. And there, I think that is a whole world of opportunities for people to be able to more quickly, efficiently, and securely receive money, which is going to help small, medium-sized businesses, individuals, et cetera. So that is on one side. Now, cryptocurrencies per se are commodities, right? And I've said this in regards to Bitcoin in this regards. It's I think the last thing, kind of as all of you following Latin America, and that it as well, if not better than I, speculation, adding speculation is not what the region needs, right? So, when we talk about Bitcoins and all of these commodities per se that are highly speculative, it's not going to help bring stability or attract investment to those countries. Look, El Salvador is a dollarized economy. It's one of its comparative advantages. I'm sorry, I'm this obsession with comparative advantages, right? But one of its comparative advantages is that stability it has because of from the currency risk in regards to the dollarization. So, as I've said publicly, and I'll repeat, adding turbulence, adding speculation to that is literally adding a competitive disadvantage to their advantage. So what's the point of that? I don't think it's going to attract more investment or anything of the sort in that regard. So we are starting, and we need to do a better job on also kind of helping from an information educational perspective on the difference between the blockchain technologies, which are extraordinarily beneficial and helpful and can really help have a great impact. And then all of these, the Bitcoins and all of these current commodities, frankly, that, would actually only add speculation and turbulence, which I don't think any country in the region wants or needs at this time.
Great. Mauricio, I think we're out of time. There's lots of other areas we could get into, the issue of small and medium-sized enterprises and what the IDB is doing to foster that, what the IDB is doing to come out of COVID. But I think it's time to turn to our panel with Richard Feinberg and Ricardo Zuniga. So thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. Thanks for what you're doing to help the region recover from this devastating pandemic and all of the economic and human suffering that this has caused throughout the region. Surely nearshoring is a piece of this, and it's an issue that the Wilson Center will continue to engage on, for the foreseeable future. So thank you again to you, to your staff, and we will now switch over and invite Richard Feinberg to activate his microphone. Richard is the author of a study on nearshoring that we published that's available on our website. It should be available on the event page for this conversation. Richard is an emeritus professor at the University of California, San Diego. He is a dear friend and colleague of the Latin American program of the Wilson Center, and has worked with us in a number of capacities, also has a long history of service in the U.S. government, at the State Department, the Treasury Department, the White House National Security Council. I'm also really pleased to welcome back to the center Ricardo Zuniga, the State Department Special Envoy for the Northern Triangle, for whom nearshoring is a critical piece of addressing the root causes of migration in Central America, the creation of jobs and opportunities that are needed to keep people, to have people look to their own countries as a place where they have a future. So we'll hear first from Richard, then Ricardo, and then we invite again all of our audience to submit their questions to our Twitter account at LatAmProg or via email lap@wilsoncenter.org. So Richard Feinberg, thanks again. Thanks for your great work. And over to you to lay out the contours of your argument.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Pleasure to be with you. Really appreciate this opportunity with the Wilson Center. It's been a pleasure working with you, Cindy, and with Ben, getting this paper launched. And thank you, Duncan, for being with us as well. Mauricio, certainly we're inspired by your presentation and so glad to see that the IDB is focused on the opportunity of supply chains. Why are we here discussing this? This is really, as Mauricio suggested, a multi-generational opportunity to seize the moment, to really focus on the Caribbean Basin. And there are several reasons that we're all here, right? That there are immigration pressures on our southern border. There's instability in a number of the countries that are making headlines in the region, serious threats to democratic governance, disruptions in global supply chains, and geopolitical rivalries which are playing out in the region. Plus, let's not forget, you have the activism of several diaspora communities who have a lot of political heft here in the United States. So each of these big trends weigh heavily on Biden administration regional and global objectives. So therefore, the stars are aligned. Let's really seize the moment to put in place some special, powerful instruments to try to shake the region out of, let's recognize, an unsuccessful development position over the last several decades in general in the Caribbean Basin, focusing on that. So what do we need? And what my paper suggests and what I'm going to suggest here is that this is the opportunity for a comprehensive reform strategy that integrates investment, trade, aid, and migration issues. The reform strategy has to be bold enough to halt the region's tragic decline in recent decades, and a reform strategy credible enough to convince investors to bet on the region's future. First, as a prelude possibly to Ricardo's remarks, and I so appreciate his being with us today, we need to overcome the dichotomy between those who would focus on governance only and anti-corruption, as Ricardo and Eric Olson did in their excellent Wilson paper on lessons learned. Excellent paper, I highly recommend it. And then those who emphasize job creation and economic development, which is just another way of talking about politics and economics, transparency and markets. We need both, guys. We need a political economy approach, which of course is what David Ricardo and the greats of early economics always spoke about political economy, and even better, an international political economy, because the Caribbean Basin small economies already are integrated heavily into the global economy. So that has to be a starting point. All right, let me focus on one big component of a policy response to these problems, and that is this issue of global value chains or supply chains, which is the centerpiece of my paper, Widening the Aperture, Nearshoring in Our Near Abroad. The Biden administration, at various stages of development, some executive orders that might be launched solely by the executive branch, others which will require congressional approval, in the ongoing debates that we've all been watching in the Senate and the House over recent months. But they proposed a series of measures made in America. These measures suggest important, powerful fiscal incentives that include grants, loans, tax incentives, government procurement, long-term supply contracts. Now, these are made in America proposals. And I do think we have to recognize here, there's the danger of backdoor protectionism when you talk about made in America that would not necessarily benefit the Caribbean Basin and Latin America, in fact, could be prejudicial. The administration, in talking about its made in America supply chain proposals, has said that they want to include allied, friendly partner countries under this broad policy umbrella. Very powerful, very potentially important. So the issue is, when one hears the term allied, friendly, is that just another way of talking about countries with which we have military alliances? This is, say, NATO on the one hand and Japan and South Korea on the other. Where's the Caribbean Basin in this? So what I want to see, Ricardo, the administration decide, is that the Caribbean Basin should be labeled as friendly, allied partner countries, and that with that label, they would be eligible for these various supply chain incentives, at least some of them, that now go under this label of Made in America fiscal incentives. Labeling the Greater Caribbean Basin as friendly allied partners would require a reconceptualization of the Caribbean, not just as a crisis-prone, troublesome region pressing on our southern border, but rather we would have to look at the region as being integral to U.S. security, to U.S. prosperity, as integral to our national destiny. Now, the administration already recognizes that there's an intimate relationship here when they've been talking about crafting policies to address climate change and clean energy. So that's a very good start. I go further and I say, as Congress and the administration design our competitiveness and job creation strategies, and as we look at infrastructure, airports, seaports, roads, as we look at promoting digital connectivity, as we look at cultivating human infrastructure, at deepening training and education, that all of these initiatives should envelop also our near abroad, that is to say, the Caribbean Basin. So the Caribbean Basin is not just getting traditional US AID money, which can be valuable, but those AID programs have to be wrapped into and around these broader initiatives that the administration is using to alter supply chain investment strategies, to bring them back to the US in some cases, but more likely nearshoring in our own near abroad. Supply chains, of course, are not new to the Caribbean Basin. Already in Central America alone, about 500,000 people work already in these supply chains in an expanding variety of sectors, by the way. Some of us may just think about, apparel companies. That was true more in the 1980s when this began. But also we have supply chains in Central America in electronics and pharmaceutical and medical devices, various agricultural products. Plus in the service sector, you have logistics, you have back offices, services, you have IT development. You've got a lot of call centers when you're trying to fix something on your credit card or make an airplane reservation, right? Often those call centers are located increasingly in the region because they take advantage of convenience time zones as well as language and bilingualism already in the region. But make no mistake, investments in the Caribbean Basin are in the U.S. national interest. They increase U.S. competitiveness. They create, not destroy, jobs in the United States. That these nearshoring value chains would, on average, incorporate more value added in the U.S. They would create more jobs in the U.S. Than value chains that are located in more distant locations. Also, unlike Europe and East Asia, the Caribbean Basin does bring huge advantages, obviously, with regard to locational proximity, faster, cleaner transportation, and cost competitiveness. So what I propose in my paper, and again, this is seizing the moment. The IDB, Mauricio mentioned programs, but so many programs covering so many issues, so many places. What I'm arguing for here is to seize the moment and focus, to really develop some powerful programs in the region that alter the status quo in important ways, that alter the way investors, domestic and international, look at the region. So what I propose, and this is a thought, but something to get the conversation rolling on focus, I propose in my paper to develop more rigorous, larger supply chains, building on what already exists in the region. I propose investments of $1 billion in each of 5 to 6 industrial hubs or parks in the Caribbean Basin. In each case, that $1 billion would fund investments in infrastructure, digital connectivity, worker training. These could expand on existing industrial parks or could be greenfield operations. Where would the financing come from? Some of it was from these U.S. government appropriations. Some could be from some of the AID monies, but also these tens of billions of dollars that are being discussed under jobs and infrastructure. Some of that also could be applied into the Caribbean Basin. Also, money, of course, can come from obviously from the IDB, from the World Bank, multilateral sources, the U.S. Exim Bank, and the Development Finance Corporation, which have the advantages of leverage. So they may only have $1 billion of paid-in capital, but they can lend out 10 billion or more. So those can be powerful. But those are international global agencies. So are they going to be directed to focus an inordinate amount of their activities into the Caribbean Basin, Ricardo? That's what we're looking for. Clear direction to these agencies. This has to be a priority, not just one among many, many activities that you engage in all the time. But then, of course, local producers have to be part of this. They could invest in their own production facilities, but again, to be eligible for the benefits that will be available for investment in friendly, allied partner nations, not just the EU and East Asia, but our local neighbors. So let's imagine production hubs. If each production hub adds 100,000 jobs, extra jobs in 5 years, 6 hubs, that'd be 600,000 jobs in 5 years. In 10 years, one can imagine 3 times as much. That would be 1.8 million jobs. If we say that each worker has a household of 5 people, do the math, 9 million people in Central America and the Caribbean would be supported just in these industrial hubs. And that would definitely have an impact in reducing the push factor, which is driving people northward. Now, imagine if these hubs are linked in a regional network. And this, I think, is the exciting vision part of it. This network in all these different countries would agree on common standards, on high labor and environmental standards. Some of these standards are already written into existing DR CAFTA, but they could be improved upon and made more palatable in terms of people interested in the social justice piece of foreign investment. So we need transparent monitoring systems, serious transparent monitoring systems. It's nice that companies do their own internal monitoring. That's good, but we, the public, have to know. So I say there should be metrics by factory, readily available on the Department of Labor website and other websites around the region. Firms operating in these industrial parks as part of these compacts should agree on governance principles. And I know this is what Ricardo Zuniga is looking at. How do we make that the private sector be part of this? Not just now the private sector thinks, hey, we're under attack. they're accusing us of corruption. We got to make this positive. We have to have the private sector see that yes, they sign on themselves as partners, agreeing on governance principles, transparency in procurement, on rules governing commercial dispute settlement, and on anti-corruption ethics. That the factories, also the companies and the individual factories, have to embrace high ESG standards and associated monitoring. And of course, there have to be tight security measures to deter international terrorism, cyber criminality, and money laundering. These high social justice and global standards would serve in these hubs, integrated hubs, would serve as pilot projects designed specifically to spill over into national practices, so that the industrial hubs, as sometimes they have been in the past, would not be isolated enclaves, but would rather be model drivers of national reform. Local business in the region would participate in important ways, as owners of real estate, in some cases as investors in supply chain facilities, and especially as SMEs producing local components and generating good local jobs. Let's recognize a major problem that explains the disappointing growth rates in the region in recent decades. Local investors, they're rational. They're afraid of local political strife. And if you look at the last 200 years of Central America, unfortunately, those fears are well-founded in history. They're also discouraged by inefficiencies in government. So as a result of these realities, what do they do with their investment funds? They diversify internationally, as to say, capital flight on a massive scale. And individually, what do? They live in their own enclaves, separate from the social services provided publicly to the rest of the society. These entrepreneurs already have one foot in Miami, in Houston, or Atlanta. These discouraged elites evade taxes, abandon public education, and take a lot of money out of the country. We have to get these rational actors to alter their investment patterns and their perceptions. That's where we need something dramatic. And that's what I'm suggesting is this a new successful investment trade model built around these hubs and other investments that could alter the behavior of the entrepreneurial sector in the region, so they become not seen as corrupt, problem, predatory elites, as some have said, but rather they become genuine drivers of national development. That the regional production hubs that we're talking about are a potent instrument to alter the perceptions and investment choices of local entrepreneurs. Okay, in addition to that, the investment part, you have to have a trade part. We already have good trade agreements. We can build on those. I don't want to get bogged down here in technicalities, but what we're talking about is one, synchronizing the rules of origin across these trade agreements, and two, permitting accumulation across supply chains in participating countries. USTR knows exactly what I'm talking about. And what we can do is we can link these trade reforms to compliance with high social standards. So you want to be part of these agreements, amended. Here are the labor and environmental standards that all participants would have to abide by. All of this could be formalized in bilateral or even regional compacts. These social compacts would publicize this new, more optimistic vision of a fusion between the economies and societies of the United States and the Caribbean Basin. The vice president's call to action, that I assume Ricardo Zuniga will be talking about, to deepen private sector investment in specifically the Northern Triangle, but why couldn't it apply to the Caribbean Basin? I think it's on the right track. But as far as I can see, I don't yet see sufficient incentives there to alter these private sector risk calculations that I've been talking about. To get enough investment to really matter, to shock the regional economies into a higher new growth path, that would require a broader and deeper vision. And that's some of the measures that I outline in my paper. But basically, most importantly, to put the region under this umbrella of allied friendly nations that Building Back America is talking about. So I think, as Mauricio hinted at, And as Ricardo Zuniga well knows, we have a huge opportunity coming up in terms of inter-American relations with the Summit of the Americas early next year. We don't have an exact date. What a great place to launch this bold, comprehensive vision. And most importantly, of course, before we do that, to consult with the stakeholders in the United States, in the region, because it's critical to have wide, deep stakeholder buy-in for long-term sustainability of these problems and of these solutions. So to summarize, to wrap up, a greater Caribbean Basin Compact, GCC, I think would be a potent solution to several major U.S. policy concerns at this moment. How do we secure U.S. supply chains? How do we make them more, not less competitive? How do we create good jobs in the region to reduce the push factor behind migration? How do we demonstrate that democratic capitalism can foster social justice? How do we provide a constructive alternative to Chinese encroachment in the region? More broadly, how do we demonstrate the U.S. capacity to implement a bold, strategic, multi-stakeholder vision in close cooperation with friendly allied partner nations? So I think that's the promise, that's the opportunity. Thank you very much. Look forward to Ricardo Zuniga's responses and others.
Excellent, Richard. Thanks so much for your introductory remarks. Thanks for the paper that you worked with us on. Thanks in particular for the detailed vision that you've provided for a way to address a lot of the challenges that come from the Caribbean and Central America and convert them into economic development opportunities and in the U.S. economic and national security interests. So we greatly appreciate it. Ricardo, before I turn to you, I just want to remind our audience that you're part of this conversation. Please continue to send in your thoughts, reactions, and questions. You can contact us on Twitter. We are at LATAMPROG, LATAMPROG, or simply send us an email to lap@wilsoncenter.org. Ricardo, welcome. Thanks again for being a part of this. In addition to your general reactions to Richard's presentation and his paper, I wonder if you could quickly address a big question that Mauricio raised, which was whether internally in the U.S. government, folks are embracing this vision of nearshoring. You know, Mauricio mentioned in passing that in the Trump administration, there were internal tensions, which are natural and could be expected, about whether the focus should be exclusively on onshoring, on reshoring, on bringing these jobs back to the United States. Do you get a sense among your colleagues at State, at the NSC, at USTR, and Commerce and elsewhere, that there's a real appetite for what Richard is promoting, which is recognizing the U.S. interest in the economic development of our near abroad?
Well, Ben, first of all, thank you so much for having me back with the family over at Wilson. I really am so happy and delighted to be here and to be here with Mauricio and Richard on something that is so important. And to make me feel at home, Oscar Cruz made sure that I centered my camera so that I would be here. And now I really feel like I'm back at Wilson. And Richard, having just published something now with the Wilson Center, you should know that there is always a risk that you will be asked to put some of those things into practice. So the danger signals abound. Look, Ben, I think to start, yes, I think conceptually there's enormous support. It tracks exactly as both Mauricio and Richard flagged. It tracks with the concept of more secure supply chains, of a vision for concentrating as much of our capacity and resources in the Americas as part of this diversification of our resource base and our supply chain base. And what I hear consistently, not just within the administration, but from members of Congress in both parties, is as we're doing this, we should, what can't come to the United States, we should first prioritize for the Americas to the extent we can possibly do that. So the concept has broad support. But as Richard said, this is not something that happens on its own. And as Mauricio laid out in his presentation, this doesn't just happen. It has to be made to happen. There has to be a deliberate approach to incentivize all of these. And that, of course, wades into a whole range of competing demands. And I'm certainly not going to speak to USTR's authorities here. I would be summoned quickly to USTR for a rapid negotiation that I know I would lose. So I think that it's important, though, to say that the concept has tremendous support. if you'll allow me, I think I want to just lay out a couple of quick items here that I think are important to respond to, because what I see is that from the presentation that Mauricio laid out, it was already clear. We have broad alignment with the IDB, with other very important multilateral lenders, but I think that the way that Mauricio described the incentive, the strategic incentive for us to focus on the not just on the Caribbean but on the Americas as a whole is absolutely clear, and so that's important. You're starting from the same baseline. I think with our overview of the needs to promote and focus on job growth and on creating opportunities is absolutely key, as is the need to make nearshoring a practical reality, to follow that logic that that Richard was laying out for those very important economic actors who are local investors who invest elsewhere outside of, as again, I'm going to focus here on Central America, but there are certainly others as well. So other parts of the region that are key to this as well. So I just want to describe very briefly what our overall approach is on this. And I think that what Richard and Mauricio are laying out are some of the tools that are valuable for expanding the potential of the region. But nearshoring requires the right competitive business environment. We need to increase Central American competitiveness as part of our work. And Richard outlined high-level proposals to tilt the logic in favor of the Americas. I would say that our approach, particularly in Central America, is about making using our root causes strategy to generate the right conditions. I think there's a lot of focus on our work on governance and anti-corruption, and it's precisely because, as we're all quoting David Ricardo here, using that example, but the fact is that we do have to look at this as a matter of political economy. Governance and economic opportunity are intimately linked. They're really very tightly connected. And the challenges to governments and business leaders are how to integrate that view and how to think and scale and prioritize strong strategic and long-term public goods. That's what we're trying to incentivize. That's where we need to partner with the IDB and others. And that's where Richard sets a practical but very ambitious vision that we should be following. So I would just point out that we have a couple of important pillars that have been laid out in a root causes strategy that was sent around today. I'm actually going to pause for just a moment because I see a technical issue. I just want to make sure that I'm still being heard okay.
You are, Ricardo. Please continue, and thanks.
Thanks so much. Okay, it's always good because sometimes you can do your best work while you're frozen. But in this case, I'm glad to see that's not the case. So today we rolled out a root causes strategy where there is an intense focus on the addressing economic insecurity and inequality. And what we're talking about trying to do is create that, remove those barriers and incentives to investment. This is the way that we've approached this, really is guided by what we're hearing from private sectors, not just multinational private sectors, but also the local private sector. Richard, I mean, you made a very good point that some may feel under attack or they're being accused of corruption, but a lot of our ideas, in fact, most of our ideas come from the private sector. Mauricio had a great point that the multinational private sector brings with it, particularly when it's the U.S. private sector brings with it the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which was viewed often in the past as a competitive disadvantage for U.S. companies, but now, particularly since the cases around Lava Jato and Odebrecht began circulating and affecting so many actors in the region, association with U.S. companies that came under FCPA became a brand positive, and it actually became a competitive advantage in many cases. We want to use that reality, the fact that companies are working to have a level playing field, to have judicial certainty, to invest in ways that are going to benefit their bottom lines and our bottom line as well. I mean, it's important to flag that we often talk about the challenges, but the CAFTA DR countries are the third largest U.S. market after Mexico and Brazil for the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean. And you have to think about the fact that despite the crisis, that remains the fact. Now, what we should be trying to do is make that, increase that to the extent we possibly can. So our approach, we're going to focus on a set of particular objectives. One has been discussed already to some extent, which is the fostering a business enabling environment for inclusive growth. And part of that certainly involves our strong message on anti-corruption, but a lot of it is digging in, removing barriers that local companies and chambers and that multinational companies have identified. For example, successfully concluding a public-private partnership law in Guatemala, removing political considerations from infrastructure development, or to the extent that infrastructure development requires final approval in Congress. That's been identified by actors in Guatemala as a major limiting factor because it presents too many opportunities for graft. You can repeat that in administrative decisions and opportunities around Central America and around the region, which is why Mauricio's focus on digitalization of processes is such an important part of anything related to governance. So in other words, this is not about finger wagging. It's about removing barriers that have been plainly identified. The constraints analyses are already there. We don't need to do a lot of work to identify those. We need to see that there is a political will and the investment and the incentive structure to make that happen. So we are supporting, a big part of our work is to support the local actors that are working in favor of economic development, but also in favor of transparency for exactly this reason. We also agree that on the importance of diversifying and increasing trade. I believe it was Mauricio who identified that inter-regional trade, it really falls short of where it needs to be. Just take the case, I'm not picking on Guatemala, but it's a great example because they're right next to Mexico, and yet only a very small percentage of their international trade is with Mexico. It's really underperforming, but it's also underperforming within Central America and within Central America and the rest of the corridor. It really is one ecosystem. When you think about production chains and value chains, and as Richard points out, the questions of accumulation keep rising because there's a recognition that we're talking about one environment. And in that, you have to include the Caribbean. We also, as I said, in my job, I focus very much on the most challenging conditions, but you have had successful application of CAFTA DR in Panama, Costa Rica, and the Dominican Republic, where you see significant and important growth. Other areas that we're going to focus on, this enhancing workforce development, health, education, and protection. These obviously, as the COVID pandemic showed, these very practical issues of workplace safety and the conditions of work are going to be a very important part of this. Included in that, I would say, that is the importance of expanding growth, not just to have the overall GDP growth, but to have GDP growth that reaches much deeper into societies than has been the case so far. So the call to action, for example, that led by the vice president included a very significant component involving promoting the movement from the informal sector to the formal sector, improving access to banking, improving access to digital services, precisely because we want to see not just a greater inclusion, but to make use of that potential that exists across the population and not just concentrating it within a very small portion of the population, which we know that inequality remains a major problem and a major factor and frankly, a major competitive disadvantage for Central America right now. And finally, we're going to focus on building resilience to address climate change and food insecurity, because again, that is an important part of that mix. I think that recognition of the vulnerability of the region to major natural disasters spurred in large part by climate change, when you talk about the dry corridor, but also major storms that have intensified and increased in frequency, that wipe out the basic infrastructure of the country. Just the most clear example is what happened last year in Honduras, where really the industrial base and the Sula Valley was largely wiped out on top of the damage caused by the pandemic. These are significant setbacks that require investment and investment in infrastructure, but also investment in government capacity to respond to these disasters. I just want to conclude by saying that this U.S. assistance is not intended to substitute for the role of the private sector. On the contrary, our assistance and our diplomatic engagement, together with some of the ambitious proposals that Richard has put on the table, are intended to incentivize that enabling environment. We can work with those who are working to remove those barriers, those constraints to investment. We can do that in very specific ways. The purpose of the call to action is to build a large coalition from outside Central America and from within Central America to remove those barriers that have been identified and to incentivize growth. And completely agree, they're also going to require an environment, an international trade environment that creates greater incentives and creates a greater logic to make those kinds of changes, because they are going to generate opportunities. I haven't even talked about irregular migration, but that is a core focus. But I should say that the administration begins from the perspective that we have a shared future with not just Central America, but obviously with Mexico and the Caribbean. It really is the near abroad. That is a vision that is absolutely essential. It is our reality. We have these tight familial, economic, and strategic connections in a shared future, and we have a stake. We have a deep, deep stake in ensuring that it is a positive future. So that requires tough decisions, not just in the region, but on our part as well. And certainly think that Richard's ideas have been a major contribution, and really appreciate Mauricio's strong collaboration with the administration as we address these fundamentally strategically valuable issues related to Central America and to the Caribbean on the part of the administration. And thank you very much, and really appreciate and look forward to the discussion.
Ricardo, thanks so much. Richard, thanks for the overall description of the key takeaways from your paper, and remind everybody once again that it's on our website available for download. There's an excellent question from Andrew Rudman, the director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. Vice President Harris, in charge of the Central America strategy, visited Mexico in addition to Guatemala on her first trip to the region. And the Mexico and the U.S. government have pledged to work together to address root causes of migration from Central America. So the question is, does it make sense, Richard Feinberg, to have one of these hubs in Mexico in support of this strategy? But also for both of you, would it be advisable to try to fuse the USMCA, Mexico, United States, Canada, with CAFTA-DR? Or does that get overly complicated? But certainly it would be one obvious way of creating a larger free trade zone in the region.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. First, let me really thank Ricardo Zuniga for his remarks. Very, very encouraging. It seemed to me we were aligned in many areas, even though you hesitated to take on trade issues initially. You sort of gradually waded into the accumulation debate, which is Cindy's question. But also, let me say I was super pleased to hear your affirmation that the administration does share this vision of the importance of the near abroad. I hope that does, in formal terms, at the NSC and the NEC, wrap the region into their allied, friendly partner group of countries as they conceive of their domestic policies to wrap the region around. So it's not just traditional foreign policy instruments, but this broad new set of powerful incentives that the administration is putting in place. And as you emphasized, it's really all about removing obstacles and creating positive incentives to the private sector, both internationally and domestically. So the idea of accumulation is that you add together the local content that's produced, say, in DR-CAFTA countries and in USMCA countries, which is to say the Central America and the Caribbean, and this much larger Mexico market. So I think I was hearing sounds from Ricardo that he seems to think that's a good idea. Now, of course, as soon as you get into trade policy, it does raise lots of political controversies. And that's why I emphasized that why not use any modifications one might make to existing trade agreements and link them to social justice issues, and which USTR is very focused on these days. Trade policy has to be shown to work for middle class America, right? Okay, so that's, I do think any modifications, you could build in strong social justice monitoring mechanisms. The multinational companies do this on a routine basis. It could just be done in a little more of an organized way and make sure there's full transparency so that people see them. But yes, I think this idea, Cindy, of accumulation which would tie together more markets in the Caribbean Basin and Mexico, then ultimately probably exporting into the United States. That's a very exciting potential integration element. Back in the old days when we used to work on DR-CAFTA, regional integration was thought of in terms of facilitation, that is to say, removing barriers at customs, etc., which always remains important. But this idea of accumulation takes it to a whole nother level, provides the incentives for business investment to link together better production facilities in countries throughout the larger Caribbean Basin, including Mexico and, of course, the U.S. So thanks for that question, a great one.
Ricardo, naturally, you and your colleagues are focused on broad improvements in governance, strengthening of democratic institutions, the rule of law in the Northern Triangle, elsewhere in the region. Richard's paper, I think, recognizing the urgency of attracting investment, focuses on these carve-outs, these exclusive economic zones, special systems to guarantee decent treatment of workers, decent treatment of the environment, a way to reassure companies that they will be engaging in a way that won't create potential reputational risks, risks to their ESG commitments, regulatory risk. My question for you, Ricardo, is how you see the role of special economic zones as part of this broader vision, whether in the short term that is a more expeditious way to bring in investment. As I said, it's core to Richard's vision in trying to bring in the quantity, the scale of investment that is needed in the short term, rather than waiting for the broader governance reforms that I think are absolutely needed and you're rightly focused on in your broader root causes policies.
So I would say, I think Mauricio pointed this out as well, that these zones do contribute significantly to job growth and economic growth. And I think that we all here share the view that such zones should sort of elevate, raise the value to both the companies and to those who are working at those companies. In other words, what you want to be sure is that you are adding rather than subtracting to the overall value of an investment to both the companies themselves, but also to the broader communities. And that's one way to get at them. You're right, we are very focused on systemic change, but that also has very practical applications and implications. Digital processing of customs procedures and basic government administration and in the application of taxes, for example. These are all areas that have been cited. And while those are systemic, they also carry some of the benefits that you might expect out of a particular zone and apply them at a higher level. So there's room for much of this. And I think that as long as they're pointed in the same direction, we think that they certainly do have a place.
Okay, friends, I fear that we could go on for a long time, but we're out of time. Want to thank Richard Feinberg again for the boldness and optimism of his vision. Hopefully some, if not all of this, will come to pass. And Ricardo Zuniga, thanks again for working every day on the kinds of transformations that are needed to make Central America a more prosperous and inclusive region, and to adjust the U.S. policy responses in the most constructive ways possible. So thanks again to Ricardo and Richard, also to Mauricio Claver-Carone of the IDB, to our colleague Duncan Wood, to all of you who have joined us and hung in there with us for the last hour and a half. This video will be uploaded onto the event webpage. It will be available for viewing, as is the paper by Richard Feinberg. So thank you once again. Thank you to Beatriz Garcia-Nice and Oscar Cruz, Olivia Soledad, for providing all of the technical backdrop, to our intrepid translator, Carlos, for his support throughout this event. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Cindy. Pleasure to work with the Wilson Center.